Hi, welcome to People in the News. I'm Paula Zahn. He is the other presidential candidate, Ralph Nader, and he could be a deciding factor again in yet another close race for the White House. If that is, he can get on enough ballots. From consumer champion to political lightning rod, a look at Nader, his life, his beliefs, and what is behind his decision to make another run at the presidency. Here's Bruce Burkhart.
When your car scolds you to put on your seatbelt, that is Ralph Nader speaking. When the airbag pops out to save you, that is Nader also. When you get bumped from an overbooked flight but walk away with a free ticket, thank Ralph Nader. From the air we breathe to the food we eat, it's hard to go anywhere without running into Ralph Nader's legacy. It's a legacy that seems to crash head-on with more recent history.
Put me on. Gore's retracted his concession.
Just an hour or so ago, the TV networks called this race for Governor Bush. It now appears that their call was premature.
Nader was a force in 2000. He was a force in those key battleground states where, of course, you know, the election was decided by 2 or 3% of the population.
A small fraction of the vote, but enough to end up sending George W. Bush to the White House, and enough to brand Ralph Nader as the presidential spoiler.
It irritates them that anybody dares be an underdog candidate and basically say, we're going to break up your two-party party.
And now, in the midst of another close election, he's at it again.
Today, I entered the 2004 elections as an independent candidate for the presidency of the United States.
Democrats are enraged. They are almost as angry at Ralph Nader as they are at George W. Bush. They are just furious that he's running, and they ask, why? Why is this guy running?
So, just what makes Ralph run? Is Nader a political visionary or simply a spoiler? Is it ego or higher calling? Political psychologist Aubrey Immelman.
If I had to put Ralph Nader's personality in a nutshell, I would say that Ralph Nader, personality in need of a mission.
The mission began in Winsted, Connecticut, a small New England town where Ralph was born in 1934. The fourth and youngest child of Lebanese immigrants, it was a family where citizenship was taken seriously. Ralph's father, Nader Nader, ran a restaurant in town. The joke was that for a nickel, you'd get a cup of coffee and all the political argument you would ever want.
Sometimes people would come in and sit down, they'd hear what he had to say and say, you know, there are a lot of people who don't agree with that. You're going to lose business. And he said, really? Well, isn't that too bad? When I sailed past the Statue of Liberty in 1912, I took it seriously.
In a small town where everything was within walking distance, Ralph's father would often take his son to the courthouse.
My father constantly drilled into me that the chief role of a lawyer is to advance justice.
Nader also got to witness bare-fisted New England democracy, the town meeting.
He came away with the notion that democracy wasn't a sort of a genteel occupation. It was something fierce and hard-fought and two-fisted.
Back at home, the Nader dinner table also served up plenty of food for thought.
My father asked a lot of questions that he wanted us to think about, not quick answers.
Nader would be forced, as a 7-year-old or as an 8-year-old, to sit there at the dinner table and to defend his political beliefs under just intense scrutiny and intense attack from his father.
The children were treated by their parents almost as adults. They were not allowed to go to movies unless it had a moral.
It was a strict household, but not harsh. There was that lovely balance between discipline and love.
Growing up in Winsted, Nader was always a bit different.
He carried his books in a briefcase to high school for 4 years. Most of us just packed them under our arm.
In 1951, he took his briefcase and headed to Princeton, a place where Nader continued to stand out from the crowd.
He certainly didn't make too many concessions to the style of Princeton at the time, didn't dress in the chinos and the buck shoes that were popular during that era.
It was just a wonderful place to go against the grain in order to get a real education. If you went through in a conforming way, you'd miss out on a lot, and I went through just the opposite.
After graduating from Harvard Law in 1959, Nader found a job at a small Connecticut law firm. He hated it. Just to get away, he spent his summers as a freelance writer hitchhiking across the country. It would be an eye-opening experience.
You'd often get picked up by truckers, and truckers just had amazing stories about horrible accidents they'd seen. And that got him thinking about how dangerous cars might be. And he actually saw an accident in which a small girl's head had actually been decapitated by the glove compartment.
Nader had found his calling, a citizen's fight for auto safety. The early 1960s, an optimistic time for American commerce. At age 29, Ralph Nader didn't share that optimism. The carnage he'd seen on the nation's roads made an impact. Hoping to do something about it, he moved to Washington.
He goes to work in the Labor Department for Daniel Patrick Moynihan, but also he starts moonlighting and starts learning about auto safety, writing articles about it, and ultimately he gets a contract to write a book that became Unsafe at Any Speed.
Unsafe at Any Speed, an expose blasting design flaws and cost-cutting measures in General Motors cars, particularly the Chevrolet Corvair.
General Motors had hives when they read the book. They hired an investigator. They tried to get some dirt on Ralph Nader.
General Motors hired a couple of really bumbling detectives to try to sort of look into Nader's past and look into Nader's life.
They had sent a prostitute after him also at the cookie counter of the Safeway, and he had turned her down. And so they thought, well, maybe he's a homosexual.
And then they followed me down the Senate office building, and then they couldn't find me, so they went to the police guard, and the guard said, "What are you doing? Following people here and to the Congress? What's your name?"
In 1966, a Senate subcommittee on traffic safety saw an opportunity to raise awareness. They put GM's president on the hot seat in a nationally televised hearing.
Let us assume that you found something wrong with his sex life. What would that have to do with whether or not he was right or wrong on the Corvair?
Nothing.
What if you found out he was or was not anti-Semitic? What would that have to do whether
Nothing.
the Corvair was a good or a bad car?
Nothing.
On nationwide TV, the gangly young lawyer brought GM to its knees.
I want to apologize here and now to the members of this subcommittee and Mr. Nader. I sincerely hope that these apologies will be accepted.
GM eventually paid Nader $425,000 to settle an invasion of privacy lawsuit. The committee went on to set up a federal agency devoted to traffic safety. Overnight, Ralph Nader became a household name. He was just getting started.
I felt an opportunity and an obligation to take this attention and support by the public into other consumer, environmental, and worker safety areas.
The modern muckraker used funds from his GM settlement to create an army of young lawyers, the Nader Raiders.
We were the underfunded people putting our faces against the pains of power and yelling, "Let us in, you're corrupt."
Existing pollution control laws in this country are shams.
They spurred the creation of the EPA and other federal watchdog agencies. From air travel to workplace safety to hot dog ingredients, the Raiders hit hard and made their boss a feared man in the halls of power.
So when Ralph Nader would speak, people would say, oh.
Nader got respect, but he also racked up critics.
He's pro big government in almost any situation. In terms of the regulatory burden, it's consumers who end up paying as those extra costs are passed on to them in the form of taxation, in the form of higher prices.
But love him or hate him, Ralph Nader was an icon. Sharing the stage with trendsetters like John Lennon and Yoko Ono on The Mike Douglas Show.
You'll be more likely to want to vote, particularly at a younger age, if you know what the issues are and if you can push for a real choice.
Live from New York, it's Saturday night.
He even appeared later on Saturday Night Live.
This television studio is in the RCA building in Midtown Manhattan, the heart of corporate America.
Showing a side of himself rarely seen.
He has the best sense of humor of anybody that I've ever met.
How would you describe your sense of humor?
When you have to describe your own sense of humor, you don't have a sense of humor.